Exploring the history of cannabis culture, one artifact and interview at a time. This is Cannthropology. Presented by the World of Cannabis Museum Project. With your host, World of Cannabis Executive Director, Bobby Black.
Greetings, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Cannthropology, the podcast that explores the history of cannabis culture, one artifact and interview at a time. As always, I'm your host, Bobby Black. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the double-wide, unfiltered history of rolling papers. Whether classic or king size, hemp or rice, flavored or au naturel, rolling papers have been the most common delivery method for the average cannabis and tobacco smoker for generations now. In fact, cigarettes and joints are so commonplace in modern society that we never really stop to think about where or when they were invented and how they've changed over the centuries. But the origin and evolution of the rolling paper is actually quite a fascinating topic. And who better to discuss that topic with than a man who's been referred to as a walking encyclopedia of rolling paper history. He's the founder and CEO of Raw Rolling Papers and HBI Distribution, Mr. Josh Kesselman. Josh, welcome to Cannthropology.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. It's always fun. I love talking about rolling papers, so for me, this is great.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to have you on the show, not just because of your extensive knowledge on the topic, but also because I realize what an extremely busy guy you are. And if I'm not mistaken, you're actually on your way to Spain as we speak. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm on my way to go back to Alcoy to make more rolling paper.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you making time to speak with us. Before we delve into all the dates and details and everything that I want to get into, I would like our listeners to learn a little more about you and your company and how you became the rolling paper king that you are today.
Sure. Sorry about the noise in the background. I'm literally in an airport lounge on my way to Spain. So,
briefly tell us about your background a little bit.
Well, sure. See, I fell in love with rolling papers at the age of like 5 years old, and there's a reason why. My dad used to do magic tricks with his rolling paper. He had an old Spanish brand called Marfil Arroz, and he would pull it out of the pack and light it on fire and throw it in the air. This is back when I was 5, and all the kids at the table would just be like, wow. As he would, I got to make it clear, it would vanish. It was a rice-style paper, and this type of paper burns exceptionally clean. So he would light it on fire and throw it up, and it would just vanish. And you would have that moment where you were thinking in your mind, like, wow, there really is magic. Magic's real. Like, and you imagine this whole world of possibilities. So for me, I fell in love with rolling papers back then at 5. So as time went on, I became a collector of rolling papers, and I was just so enamored with them for so long. Any chance I got, I would buy whatever pack I saw that was different. And in the 90s, I put my collection online. I was one of the first people to put my collection online. I had one of the larger collections in the world at that point. And that kind of brought me into the world of rolling papers because there were other collectors, and we all began talking and sharing and trading, and that kind of led me into the path of business.
And Raw actually wasn't your first foray into the rolling paper business, right? You had a brand called Elements as well.
Yeah, Elements was actually, okay. So I had my collection, and I opened up a tiny little store while I was still in school in Gainesville, Florida. And during this time, and again, my collection's online, one of the guys said to me, one of the other collectors said, there's a man coming from Alcoy who has reopened what's basically the oldest rolling paper factory in the world to its lineage. He's looking for someone to sell his product in America. You should meet him. I was like, sure. So I go and meet the guy, a very nice older Spanish man named Jose Emilio. And Jose is talking to me in my terrible broken Spanish. And I'm very young at that point, like early 20s. And he's looking at me, like sneering at me. And he finally says to me, as he's barely talking to me, Josh, why do you even care about rolling papers? So I told him the story of my dad and the Marfil Arroz. And Jose Emilio lit up and said, Josh, I made Marfil Arroz. My father made Marfil Arroz. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, all of my wife's side had all made Marfil Arroz.
Wow.
And we thought it was just incredible. Like, what a coincidence, and fortuitous, or if you want to put it like the stars aligning. We decided we were going to bring it back. Now, we couldn't call it Marfil Arroz because the brand had been taken when the factory was bankrupted, which is a whole other story. So I decided to name it Elements, after the elements that are used to make this beautiful rice paper. And that was one of the first ones we ever launched. So yeah, Elements came way before Raw. Elements was like 96, I think. It's just, yeah, these things have been going on and on. And I
Yeah.
also made Juicy J's and so many other papers. See, the thing about making rolling papers is you're always trying to innovate. You're always trying to create. You're always trying to make something better. So you end up launching brand after brand after brand after brand after brand, and each one is different. Each one's special, and each one gives you a bunch of knowledge. And at some point, like just like a painter, any kind of artist, you have acquired enough knowledge and understanding where you're ready to paint or make your opus. And for me, that was Raw.
Wow. Well, so tell us, when and how did Raw get started?
Well, the idea for Raw was, I think, about 1993. In my little store, any customer that came in, I would bring whatever they wanted. And one of them asked me to get this particular brand of natural cigarettes. And he told me how it was natural, it's so much better. Oh my God, oh my God. I was, all right, cool. So I brought them in for him. And back then it was hard to get this particular cigarette. And he comes in and I sell him his pack. And he said, hey, Josh, you want one? I said, sure. He opens it up. And in my mind, after he'd been telling me it was natural and all my knowledge of rolling papers, I thought it was going to be this beautiful natural brown paper. But instead, it was still a bright white bleached paper, just like anything else I'd ever seen, full of chalk and all those things. And I was like, oh man, really? So I was just so surprised that it was a white cigarette that's when I realized through my collection and all my friends' collections, I had never before seen the type of paper I was envisioning, which was this translucent, natural brown paper that was not bleached and had no chalk and was made in like this particular way that would be as natural as realistically possible. I wanted to bring it back. So that's when the idea came, was in 93. But I couldn't launch it until 2004, 2005, because no one would listen to me. I was just a guy with a store. I'm trying to explain to these mills what I want. They're all laughing at me. So again, you have to kind of make your bones and get people to trust you and kind of build up knowledge and trust and understanding and money and build all of that up until finally now people are willing to listen to you. Now people are willing to talk to you more. And you take it and I risked it all to create Raw. I had to buy so much of the bulk material that it was a true risk of everything. I would have gone bankrupt if it hadn't worked. But I had to do it, and we did it, and it freaking worked. I knew it would work. I knew people wanted it, and I had to make it for them, you know?
Yeah, it sure did work. Holy cow. Dominate.
Yeah.
Totally took over the market by storm. And, we should probably mention that part of the reason for that is the fact that you started your own rolling paper distribution company, HBI. Can you talk to us a little about that?
HBI was really, partially, it was, I come from a retail background where I started in retail, and I used that. I set up a wholesale business trying to cater to get the things into stores that I thought were missing from stores. They were missing from my own store, things I had trouble getting, and things that people really wanted that were more unique and different. So it wasn't like trying to go up against the big distributors. It was more like trying to fill the gaps that they were missing. So, for example, back then you could barely get a good selection of rolling papers. You really couldn't get. So I started carrying every single rolling paper that was ever made. And I would work with my friends in Europe in order to bring over lots of any kind of rolling paper that was exotic. Brands that didn't even matter like much about it. Some of them had no English on it. It didn't matter. It was exotic. It was different. We're talking about 1997 right now. And it was, and people just wanted it. I also found that the stores could do better because I could get them a box of rolling papers for like a box of 50 rolling papers, and each one had 50 leaves. And that box might cost me $5, and I would sell it to the store for like $9 and make $4, and I was happy. And the store now, if you think about it, it's a 50 count. That's costing them like what, 25 cents a booklet, and they're still selling it for the same $1.25 or something. So the store is jumping for joy. I'm happy because it's a beautiful paper, and for me, $4 is a great margin. And everybody's winning except for the big old guys who hated me,
Yeah.
And but it was all things like that. And then it gave me a chance to bring over all these cool rolling accessories and make my own. Like I gained a lot of knowledge over those years of distributing just anything weird I could get from Europe, and I would make my own different things. I would do things like Rizla had made a roll box. This really cool automatic rolling box, but it was only for a single wide paper. So I would take it and modify it. I would make a 79 millimeter for 1.25. Then I made a king size automatic rolling box. And we would just go off like that, like tips. Tips were something I used to make when I was a very young smoker in order to keep the smoke away from my face, because just thanks to my heritage, I got big lips. So then I started packaging tips just because I was tired of cutting up business cards and rolling for people. And I said, I can make a business out of this, or not, I can make a product out of this. And I started making tips. And in America in 1997, everyone thought I was fucking nuts. Like, what the hell are these things? I'd work with print shops in Phoenix, and we would make these tips, and I would cut the paper to make it where it would roll smooth because I had no paper. So I would cut it. I'm not going to tell you which way, but a special way with the grain to make it where it would roll smoother. And people would try to copy it. And if I was lucky, they would just cut it completely wrong, so their tips would square, and mine were always smooth because they didn't understand what they're doing. They're copying. They don't get it, And so I ended up making a business of tips for America and convincing everyone to use tips because it's so much easier to roll and it makes for so much of a better smoke and saves you so much money. And I used to have to pitch to people over and over again why you need to use a tip, why you need to use a tip, why you need to use a tip. Well, the invention of tips led to so many other things. Like when I started, the first tips I ever sold, I think, were actually even earlier than that. It was back in '93 in my store when I would cut them for people, and I would do all these different things. But tips led to cones. It led to so many other things that we could do. And cones was another one of the things that we were able to propagate because, some people couldn't roll. So back in my store in '93, I used to roll up what we called a two-lip. And we'd call them tulips verbally, but it was actually called a two-lip because it had two different gum lips. And it was basically the predecessor of the modern cone. And then my friend Arthur managed to set up a cone factory in the late 90s, and then we were able to really mass produce cones together. And we still work together to this day. So yeah, like all these different things, all these different rolling products, were able to really get it out there. The cool thing was, like, I was able to live my passion, Bobby, where it was like teaching the world to use pokers. You know what I mean? Like, I never thought I would be able to do things like that. I never thought I would be able to give classes on porosity to the world, to teach them, like, I can't believe you guys are going to listen to me talk about porosity and why it's important. Like, yeah. I'm able to do videos where I talk about these things and teach people about stuff that I never thought anyone would give a shit about. Like, if you would have told me in '96, hey man, someday people are actually going to give a shit when you talk about porosity, I'd be like, really? Like, they're not just going to fucking tune me out and think I'm like I'm reading stereo instructions. You know what I mean? And the consistency of paper, they're going to really care. Like, yeah, they're going to care. Like, really? I'm going to be like. Then I taught people about chalk, and that really blew up some of the big guys and got them so mad at me, Bobby. I learned that people began adding chalk to cigarette paper because then when the paper burns down, it leaves the white chalk behind. It gives you the appearance of a white ash, right? And makes you think the paper is higher quality because, look, all my stuff's burning with this beautiful white ash. And you don't realize it's just leaving behind some chalk dust. Now, nothing wrong with smoking chalk. I'm not going to say that there's anything wrong, but I feel like a consumer should know that they're smoking chalk, and they should have the choice of whether or not they want chalk. So, like, when I make my raw paper, obviously I'm not going to add fucking chalk to it. And then people will complain, oh, I hate raw, it burns black. I was like, okay, let me teach you why it burns blacker than that paper you might have been using before this. Let me teach you about chalk. Did you know that some papers might have as much as 40% by weight calcium carbonate content? Calcium carbonate is chalk, dude. What do you think that is? And you can have that if you want, but I don't like the taste of chalk. I find that I don't like the way that it reacts with me personally. So I'm not going to make my main papers with chalk. If you want papers with chalk, I'll make you papers with chalk. If that white ash is so important to you, I will make you a beautiful paper. It'll have a beautiful amount of chalk. It burns down that white shit behind. But I don't want to smoke that thing. Well, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that goes to like what you were saying about when you were talking about the paper, how your papers, how all the papers up until yours had been white, and people assumed that meant purity, and that was a symbol of purity, but it actually isn't necessarily purity. The same thing with like sugar. Raw sugar is brown, but white sugar, you could say it's more pure, but really it's just bleached. I mean, how is that? Is that necessarily better? I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, same thing with flour and so many other things. Like a whole wheat flour, we know it's better for us. It has more flavor. The white flour is basically just fucking sugar. It's our body's better sugar, and it's not good for us at all. And it's just no one had really done it with paper because nobody gave a shit. No one even knew. No one even understood, Bobby. When I was trying to, when I was first teaching these things to people, they would look at me like, what are you talking about, chalk? And so I used to do these funny videos explaining it. And then little by little, people caught on and they understood. And then suddenly it changed the marketplace, which you can imagine. If you were a well-established brand, right, and you got your factory set up and you're making these chalked papers, and then this little fucking annoying guy, Josh, comes out there telling people about the tricks of the trade, you're going to really hate me,
Yeah.
And they do. Of course they do. But I just feel like people need to know. I think like it's not a right. They just deserve to know. They deserve to understand what they're smoking and make choices based on it.
Absolutely. Well, you obviously have a huge appreciation for the tradition, for the history, and I know that you produce raw in a traditional style in a traditional location. Can you please
Yeah.
explain to us the process and the place where the papers are made?
Okay. Well, raw really is made in Alcoy, Spain. That's all raw rolling paper is going to ship out of there one way or another. And Alcoy is the birthplace of rolling paper. So this is where Columbus, and you want to know about the history, Columbus came from Spain. You have to go back to Columbus with these kind of rudimentary cigars. They were wrapped in a combination of palm and tobacco and tied with a string. And he comes back from the quote unquote New World. I mean, Columbus was honestly a piece of crap, as we all know. But he did come back with these cigars, and they land in Spain, in Seville. And the process of people smoking cigars in Europe begins. Now, cigars do something called turning. You can only smoke them normally about halfway. And then the aristocrats would throw it on the ground and discard it. And the peasants would run up and scoop up these used cigars and then open them up and re-roll the tobacco in used newspaper. And even then, every puff was so precious that they began holding in the smoke. And this is where all cigarettes come from. So the first real rolling paper, I guess, would be newspaper, like used newspaper.
Yeah.
But this thing of smoking in paper began right then on the streets of Seville and Valencia. And it made its way up to Alcoy. Alcoy at the time, you have to understand, was the paper making capital of all of Europe because the Moors had brought paper to Alcoy and set up the first paper mills in that particular region ever for Europe was there in Alcoy.
And they founded Alcoy, right? I mean, the Moors basically founded it.
Well, they settled it. It was there before. It was there before the Moors. They basically the importance of Alcoy is that it's a very strategic spot to hold. You had to pass through Alcoy if you were going between Valencia and Alicante, both of which were key port cities that would have been very important back then. And the reason why Alcoy was also very fertile and had great water. Alcoy was set up for paper just because it had, at the time, very strong running water, and yet it was also dry. You could use the water to make paper, power the factories, and do everything you needed to do, and yet you had the natural dryness to dry it. So it was actually, for its time, it was perfect for making paper. The water does not run as much as it used to, so obviously everyone's had to adjust. But but Alcoy is perfect, or was perfect for making paper.
Okay, so there's this practice of rolling this used cigar tobacco in newspaper to smoke it, and that practice makes its way from Seville over to Alcoy, which is the paper capital, and so then what?
So now you have this combination of tobacco and paper, and voila, it all comes together. Well, the Alcoyanos take one look at these people smoking in used newspaper, and they know that that's not healthy. They know, especially back then, that newspaper is not something you would want to smoke in any way. And they decide to make a special paper just for smoking. And that was really what I consider to be the world's first rolling paper from Alcoy. And so they marketed back then, by the way, as hygienical, to tell you that it had no lead, had no mercury, and all these other things that might be in the newspaper. And it was bright white to show you that it was pure and not newspaper. And that is why rolling paper up until raw was pretty much only white. That all goes back to freaking Columbus times.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah. And so I know Columbus was around the 1500s, and I believe the paper that paper industry began in Alcoy much earlier, like around 1154 or something like that.
Yeah, much earlier.
So when did the first official rolling paper come out? Was it that company Pepe, or was that afterward?
No. Before, long before Pepe, or Pai, if you want to say it right.
Oh, my apologies.
It's okay. We have been making rolling paper. When I say we, I mean we humans have been making rolling paper in Alcoy. It's hard to document when, because branding didn't start for much later. Interestingly enough, the first, I think it was 8 trademarks ever filed in the entire country of Spain when they opened up a trademark registry for the country of Spain were all rolling papers, because we meaning the Alcoyanos, had been making so many different rolling papers even up till then. So the earliest thing I've ever seen about rolling papers was in the 1600s. I can't, again, the history on it is not so clear, but the earliest I've seen is 1600s, that they were making rolling paper in Alcoy. It's likely 1500s, even before then, but I've seen 16s. And the earlier ones were just giant sheets. They weren't branded. You just bought paper. And then it would be folded up into a little square and tied with a string. And these were big sheets. And then the fold lines of the square were what you would tear off to use for your sheet. And everybody would share paper with each other like that. Brands like Pai Pai, which I believe is the oldest rolling paper brand in existence, that one traces its roots back to, I think, early 1700s. Maybe mid 1700s.
I think 1703 was the date I saw online, but I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, it might be right.
Yeah,
history gets a little fuzzy on these things.
Yeah.
But from what we know, because people change things also, and they're just things are lost.
Yeah.
But we humans have been using rolling paper for a very long time.
Yeah. Okay, so after Pai Pai, the second oldest rolling paper company that launched and operated out of Alcoy was one that pretty much everybody would be familiar with, which is Bambu. According to what I've read online, Bambu opened their first paper factory in Alcoy in 1764, but that was originally for making paper for Bible pages. It wasn't until the late 1800s that they switched over to making rolling papers, and it wasn't until 1907 that they actually trademarked the Bambu name. Now, I seem to remember you saying that you actually are operating out of one of the original Bambu factories in Alcoy. Is it the original? Because I've seen the pictures in Alcoy of like the ruins of that like castle ruins and stuff, but that's not the factory you're talking about, obviously, right? Because that's just ruins.
Yeah, no, we don't operate out of the actual building. Okay, so there's a town called Alcaria de Aznar, and that's where the Bambu factory was. We call it the Bambu factory, but it was actually called Papeleras Reunitas. Now, the building is still there and the sign is still up. And I might end up with the building back because Alcaria wants us to move back over there. But it's what happened was in the 1980s, this big factory, was essentially bankrupted through litigation. And in the course of bankruptcy, and this is all my understanding of it, maybe I'm wrong with some of this stuff, but when they were sued into bankruptcy, basically everything was liquidated. And their competitors from Barcelona came up, and they'd given an order saying, let not one machine stand, let not one seed remain, because they didn't want them to come back. And one particular man, Jose Emilio, was one of the factory managers, and he made a deal to buy some of the old machines at the last moment before the factory was really closed. And so he bought several machines, ones that the Barcelona thought had no value because they were so old and antiquated and only did specialized papers. And he basically took those machines and set up what I guess would be the predecessor of with the remnants, and that was Iber Papel. Iber Papel at first was in Muro de Alcoy, and on this old factory that was on the edge of a cliff. It was really beautiful. And that now we've moved to another area of Alcoy, but that is us. So our lineage goes back to Papelides. We have nothing to do with Papelides, but the fact we have machines from Papelides, we have employees from Papelides. We have all the people. So now many of them have retired, but now we have their kids and their grandkids. So our lineage goes back to that factory, and that factory lineage goes back to all the way to Jose Laporta. It goes back to Evora and all of the old factories that remained in Alcoy. So we're the last ones. So we kind of have to hold the candle, the flame.
So the original factory is in ruins. It's still in ruins, and that's what it is, right? And then and when did this happen with the bankruptcy and stuff? How long ago was that?
The factory the big factory, we call it the Bambu factory, but keep in mind it's really called Papeleras Reunitas, was bankrupted in the 1980s.
And then so you're not operating out of this exact factory. You're just operating nearby with some of the machinery and employees
with
from
the machine and the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of the original employees, can you please tell our listeners who the Bambuneras are?
Bambuneras were women who made bamboo rolling papers in around the 1920s up till the until the 1980s even, when the factory was bankrupted. Bambu used to be the brand of Alcoy. They used to call it the mark of Alcoy. Bambu is not an Alcoy brand anymore. When the big factory in Alcoy was bankrupted in the 1980s, the mark they destroyed the factory, and the mark was taken from Alcoy, and it just became a private label brand essentially, where it's not Alcoyano anymore. So Bambu, as we see it nowadays, is homage to the original Bambu. The Bambuneras used to be women who would make bamboo rolling papers. I still have some of them that work at the factory in Alcoy to this day. Not very many because they're much older, but they still enjoy their work. And they don't want to leave,
I learned about them from your video online, is why I asked you, because I got a kick out of it that these
there would be hundreds of them.
These beautiful young girls were sitting there making rolling papers, and all the boys wanted to date them, right?
Yes, and they would take pictures of them together all the time. Oh, security signs.
Well, that seems like a perfect opportunity for us to cut away for our first commercial break. But stick around, everyone, because we'll be right back with more on the history of rolling papers here on Cannthropology. Welcome back, everyone. Our topic on this edition of Cannthropology is the history of rolling papers. And once again, our guest is rolling paper collector / historian and founder and CEO of Raw Rolling Papers, Josh Kesselman. So obviously we've established that rolling papers were created in Spain. Spain were the main producers. But at some point, the focus kind of shifted to France. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that began with a Frenchman by the name of Alexandre Rizla de Crampton-Lacroix. Is that am I saying that right?
Yes, we believe that's how it did. It was really the Napoleon who it was Napoleon's fault. Basically, he sent troops into Spain, and they came back. They picked up the habit of smoking and rolling in Spain, and they came back to France and brought it back with them. And the story is, and who knows which part of it is correct, is that Pierre Lacroix, is what we colloquially refer to him as, saw this, and he had a fine paper mill of some kind and began making the same kind of paper that we were making in Spain, in France.
Yeah, and he started doing that, I think, in around the 1660s, but it wasn't until like 1736 that he actually purchased a mill and incorporated his company, Lacroix Rolling Paper, which, from what I read, was actually issued a license by Napoleon himself to produce rolling papers for the French army.
Yes, I've read all this too, and then I also read something from the family history that said that was all incorrect. So I don't know if that part of it's true or not, but it's a beautiful story, and that's what they say in there. It might not be right, but it's a beautiful story. So I'm not sure how much of that part is correct. But somehow, one way or another, it seems they're what we call Rizla rolling papers, which are very popular in the UK. I don't think they're sold in America anymore. They have a beautiful long history through France.
Yeah, part of the fun that I've learned in doing this podcast and becoming my efforts to become a cannabis historian is just fun trying to figure out the fact from fiction and the legend and lore from the reality, because there's so many. Like you said, history is kind of blurry in a lot of places, and it's kind of fun digging around, seeing what you can find, though.
I know. It's a beautiful thing. But yeah, the best rolling papers are really going to come out of France and Spain, in my humble opinion. Yeah. Both countries make amazing rolling papers.
Yeah, and in the 19th century is when the competition really started to pick up, it seems like. In 1822, you had a Frenchman named René Corentin Bolloré and his brother Guillaume, who opened a paper mill on the banks of the Odette River to produce rolling papers, and they called their company OCB, which stood for O for Odette River, C for Cascadec, which is the town they were in, and Bolloré, which was their last name, right?
Yes. And Jean Bardot he was even more important to rolling papers. His mills still stand to this day. He was very good at innovating, and he would draw the power of the river in order to power his mills. And some of the innovations that happened in the early days were the ones that were the most, the ones that still kind of stick in my mind to this day.
Yeah. Well, Jean Bardot is he founded JB Papers he's the one who introduced the rolling paper booklet in 1838. And the interesting thing about his company was that people mistook the little diamond shape that separated his initials, JB, and ended up calling the papers Job or Job Papers.
Yeah, no, actually, the booklet was created by a Dominican monk outside of Alcoy.
Really?
So I know the job story you're talking about, and I think it's a beautiful piece of history. But the way that we understand it was a Dominican monk of the Franciscan order created the world's first rolling paper booklets, and for his parishioners, so they have an easier way to carry paper. And that made its way up to Alcoy, and of course the booklets were produced. And
wow.
So I think bookletting goes back a little further than the 1800s, because I've seen booklets older than that. So I'm not sure about, but the interesting part about with one way or another, I don't know which one of them did it, but you're going into the land of interleaving, and the land of interleaving, that was like 1904, where that was basically you pull out one sheet, the next one comes after it. There was also the professor, the famous professor, who what was his name again? Saul David Modiano. He was actually Jewish, and he created a rolling paper with no gum. It's to this day, I still produce them under the Modiano brand, Club Modiano. So there's been so many innovations and so many creations that everybody's trying to innovate, everyone's trying to create, but there's only so much you can do. I hope that I've earned my place in history with raw and all the crazy things we've done with that, and all the cones and all the stuff. But you never know which part of history gets carried forward, because the people who carry it forward are often the victors.
Yeah. See, now I'm glad you told me about the booklet thing, because this is why I have someone like you on the show, because not everything you read online is something you can believe, and it's good to hear from someone who really has done research on this to flesh out the proper details. And regarding the strip of gum that you're talking about, the adhesive, that was now. I read that was introduced by Rizla. Is that true?
I don't know if that's true or not on that one either, because there was adhesive before that. The question is, I'm not sure if they did the first adhesive or their first adhesive. But the acacia gum goes back to the Moors. The Moors were the ones who brought the acacia gum to Alcoy. It's also called, I don't know if you know much about acacia gum. It's called gum arabic. It's not grown up there. It's something they literally brought with them from their homeland. We still get our gum from the general area. It basically comes from like the Ethiopia, Senegal region, but it all comes from the acacia tree. Now the acacia tree there's different varieties of it. Some give off the gum, some don't. I'm actually planting some here in Phoenix of the Senegalis, which is the kind that gives off the gum. My goal is to harvest my own gum. We'll see how that goes. I've done it in Ethiopia before. You basically you scar the tree, so you create a little like tap in the tree, almost as if you were doing maple syrup. And if you come back months later, there'll be a ball there of sap.
Wow.
And you simply leave it off, and that's a piece of acacia gum.
Well, let me ask you from this angle, what would be the earliest paper that had the gum strip on it that you can think of? Like, what would be one of the earliest ones, like around, was it the 19th century? Was it earlier than that?
Yeah, no, it was 19th century is what I've seen. I've smoked rolling papers from the 19th century that had a gum line that didn't work anymore. They were from about, I think, 1880s. But regardless, it's hard to know. Like, this is the problem with history.
Yeah.
Everybody writes their own history.
And the interleaving method that you were talking about earlier that you mentioned, that's we're so familiar with it today. That's where the process where each paper in a packet is folded so that it links to the next paper. And so who innovated that? Because some people claim online that it was Zig-Zag and that they actually got their name from the fact that they patented that design.
Yes. Now, Zig-Zag did the first horizontal interleaving, where you pull one out and the next one's ready for you like that. There was interleaving. It's my understanding that Saul David Modiano also had some patent from Italy, which predates the Zig-Zag patent. Just what I'm told by a certain guy at a certain mill, that Saul David made the first actual interleave, but his pulled out vertically, meaning the sheets pulled out, but they were folded in the center, like in the middle. Whereas Zig-Zag is folded in a way where you can pull it out and use it right away. The other ones you would have to refold right afterwards. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Imagine you're pulling it out, it's folded in a different direction.
Wow.
So, but yeah, building on top of building on top of building. Some of the innovations I've seen from Alcoy, one of the greatest rolling paper man that ever lived was in Alcoy. I always wish I could. Well, I'm still trying to get his apartment right now. His apartment's for rent, and that's Jose Laporta. Jose Laporta supposedly had over 500 patents for different rolling paper creations and ways to make rolling paper and improvements on ways of making rolling paper. And in my belief, he was the greatest rolling paper man that ever lived. And you haven't even mentioned him or studied him.
Wow.
See, that's one of the things, though. Again, it's the victors. The victors always, But Jose Laporta, he was more about trying to make the absolute best. That was his thing. So he would make these beautiful factories with like artistic columns and designs on the inside and soaring ceilings in order to and put them in places with great views, just to get the workers to be inspired to make the best they possibly could make.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So what were his big innovations?
His big inventions were things like new ways to improve the paper itself in order to reduce grammage and porosity. He was really big on reducing porosity and making the paper more consistent and smooth in every sheet. His whole mantra was always about perfection. So even to this day, like that mantra stays within Alcoy. So it's a thing of like, do you know what porosity in a paper is?
Yeah, porosity. I understand what that is. Yeah.
All other things being equal, the basis weight, everything is the same. The thing that's going to determine whether your rolling paper is fast burning or slow burning is the porosity. It's basically the easiest way to think about how permeable the rolling paper, how much air can pass through it. Now, it isn't really permeability, it's really porosity, which is a little different. But just think about it as air going through, just no different than a mask that we all wear nowadays. The easier it is for air to pull through the paper, the faster it's going to burn. And it can be incredibly significant. It's more important than weight. So like a thinner paper and a thicker paper, that's important, but not as important as porosity. And Jose Laporta really perfected reducing porosity through sizers. We call them sizings. By adding these, basically, it's an additive during the paper process. He perfected it either by doing that or by just actually processing the paper in a different way, beating it down more, cooking it more, adding more caustic soap, basically caustic soda, which is soap, during the cooking process of the fibers. And he was able to, through all of his different processes, get it down to a much less permeable paper that burned nice and slow.
Interesting. So what time period was he around in?
He's 1800s into early 1900s.
And what was his paper companies? Like, what was his main ones?
Yeah, El Sol. Yeah.
Sol, yeah, okay.
That was his biggest brand.
Yeah.
And that was just, he really was all about making the absolute best.
Yeah.
So he's my favorite. Throughout all of history of all the rolling paper men that ever lived, he's the one I look up to the most.
Wow. Well, I will definitely delve into him. I'll look him up online.
Yeah, his full name is Jose Laporta Valor.
Okay, I will definitely check him out. What about the flavored papers? I have in my records that it was 1906. Rizla was the first one, and they made like strawberry and menthol or something like that.
No, it was earlier than that. Flavored rolling papers have been going around since the 1800s. They and actually the earliest smoking of tobacco, the ancient Mayans would flavor their tobacco with reeds. So like the process of flavoring has been around for a very long time. The original rolling papers that were flavored were actually made from fruit fiber. And we're talking, I think, early 1800s. I've seen evidence of this. I've never actually gotten one of the papers, but we're talking of, now there's also a difference between flavored papers and the papers were actually made out of these fruits. So the papers were made out of the fruits, which go way back, may not have actually had that kind of flavoring to it. Might have just been a fruit paper. I know that like Jose Laporta did flavored papers, and he would have been late 1800s as well.
And then also, what other innovations included, obviously, the different formulations for the papers. Obviously, there's a lot of different materials that have been used, hemp, rice, straw, all kinds of different materials. And I know that Rizla changed their name from LaCroix to Rizla Plus when they switched over to rice paper, right? Because RIZ is the French word for rice, and the LA Plus is short for LaCroix because croix is the French word for cross. What can you tell us about rice paper? It's not actually made from rice, right?
Yeah, it's a style of paper. It's the way it's always been. The rice paper itself was historically made from the rice plant, not the plant that actually gives off rice, but it's like it's a Asian plant that's similar, but it doesn't actually give off rice the kind you eat. But nowadays, for the past, let's say, 100 years, it's a style of paper that basically pays homage. You're trying to make it just like that. For it to be an actual rice paper, it needs to be white and translucent are the two most important factors for a rice style paper. Not clear, but a rice style paper has a particular look and burn characteristics to it. And that's how we judge it.
Okay. It's just like kind of misleading because when you hear rice paper, I think most people probably assume it's made from the same thing that rice is made from, but it's not.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a particular style of paper, and there's grades of it, but to make it right, it needs to pass muster, but it's not actually made out of like the rice that you eat.
Yeah. So what were the original rolling papers made from?
The earliest rolling papers were often made by leftover linens, like rags, and hemp, cotton sails, anything that was available. What I've seen through photographs is a lot of times you would have these hemp ropes that were used and hemp sails used to sail the boats across the Atlantic. And they would then, after a return journey, the sail is spent, and they would take it down and turn it into paper. You would also take leftover rags, anything like this. And there were different levels of paper. You were either just making paper itself or you're making rolling paper. When you knew that you were making rolling paper, you would try to use more pure materials. But even then, you could use the hemp sails and ropes. And you would essentially put them in the bottom of the factory where you get them wet and literally let them rot until they start to break down on their own. And then you take them and you put them in the baton. The baton is this giant hammer that would come down and mash them. Mash, 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 mash. And you're basically mashing them back into pulp. And then you take that pulp and you can use that now to make that into paper. Now, back then, you might add things we wouldn't add nowadays. Well, you would add different things to try to get it into more pliable. You would mix it up in what we call basically a bathtub with a mixer, and you would then spread it out onto screens and dry it on the screens, and then pull it off the screen, and that's your paper. That was how it was done originally before the continuous machines. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The continuous machines, because it changes and changes. Oh man, there's so many innovations that have happened over the years.
Yeah, and then eventually the other materials started to get like as far as rice, straw, flax, and then eventually, and I don't know when this started, but I know it was a big craze when I was at High Times years ago. Was suddenly had all these clear cellulose papers, and everybody wanted the clear papers. What's that about? Did you when did that come out?
I know all about them. Yeah. We even made some. So the clear papers, now you can make it out of different things. You can make it out of what we call Asiatic cotton mallet, which is a very nice pure material, and essentially that's a great way to go because it's going to be very low in certain lead and things like that. But then you could also make it out of wood. Now in Brazil, they were making it out of eucalyptus. And what you're essentially doing is you're taking plant fibers, plant cellulose, you're giving it a severe acid bath. breaking it down. And when you break it down enough, when you really process the daylights out of it and bathe it in acid enough, it literally turns clear. Now, you're going to have to add some kind of humectant because the cellulose would be like a powder in your hand. You have to take this and you add something like glycerin just to get it to be more pliable. And then you spread it out into sheets just like you would with paper, and you end up with an early form of plastic. When you hear the word cellophane is meant to, if the original stuff before we had plastic was made out of cellulose like this. So essentially what you're doing is you're bringing back a really old way of making cellophane.
Wow.
And that's what those papers are.
That's wild. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, and that's why when you lick them, they absorb your moisture. It's the humectant in there. It's the glycerin that's going to absorb your moisture and sticks to itself. You don't even need gum with them. It's a very interesting paper, but they taste pretty strong. So I'm not the biggest fan of them, but they're really cool.
Yeah, it seemed to be kind of a flash in the pan novelty kind of thing. Like, I'm sure there's still people that use them, but it was real big for a while. Everybody was using them, and then they kind of died off.
They did. They totally did die off. Yeah, there's so many different materials that you can use. I've learned over the years there's some that taste better than others, and trying to select the exact right thing for a paper is a big deal. Most people, when you see all these brands of rolling papers, a lot of them, not all of them, of course, a lot of them are just people buying someone else's paper and sticking their name on it. No different than a lot of other things we do in life, But but then you have the few of us that really take the time to either make or have made our own paper, where you're really speccing it. You're speccing it down to the minutia detail to try to get it exactly the way you want it, so it'll burn the way you want, because you're trying to elevate people to a whole other level. And those are the guys who I love the most.
Cool. Man. Yeah, absolutely.
Certain materials burn much different than others. And
yeah.
I've tasted some papers that are absolutely horrible, and I've tasted some ones that are really good. And my hope is, I wish that everyone made papers that were really good, but some make good ones, some make don't.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take another quick commercial break, but we'll be right back with more from Josh from Raw here on Cannthropology. All right, and we're back here on Cannthropology. My guest this episode is the founder and CEO of Raw Rolling Papers and a rolling paper historian, probably the most prominent one that I am aware of, Mr. Josh Kesselman. How you doing, Josh?
Good, doing great.
So I'd like to talk now a little about, the 60s, because, up until that point, we should note that the vast majority of rolling papers we used, at least in Europe and the U.S., for tobacco cigarettes. I know that the indigenous people of Mexico began mixing cannabis and tobacco as early as like 1850s or so, but the target market for rolling paper industry, I guess you could say officially or unofficially, started to shift in the 60s and 70s with the birth of the counterculture. The popularity of smoking marijuana skyrocketed across, America and Europe and such. And the hippies really embraced cannabis as part of their culture. And some rolling paper companies, it seemed like, embraced them back. I know that in 69, Zig-Zag launched their big Captain Zig-Zag Wants You marketing campaign, and the Zig-Zag man ended up being used, the image, in all kinds of rock concert posters and protest flyers and stuff. Most famously, probably by the artist Stanley Mouse and Alton Kelly used the Zig-Zag man in their poster for Big Brother and the Holding Company's legendary performances in 1966. We actually have an original of that poster signed in our museum collection, which is pretty cool. But also, it was also used, and I'm sure you're aware of this as a rolling paper collector, that one of the earliest cannabis advocacy groups, a group called Amorphia, who were based in the Bay Area, they started producing and selling Acapulco Gold rolling paper packets to help fund their activist efforts. Are you aware of that?
The way I'm aware of it, I've seen Acapulco Gold. I have a pack in my collection, but to me, it would look like it was made by somebody else based on the markings on the pack.
Well, they actually were produced also in Spain. I don't know exactly which company they worked with to do them, but this was they were produced for this group Amorphia, who later melded into West Coast Normal and were, kind of absorbed into Normal. But it was a very famous early cannabis activist group, and they used these papers. They would sell these packets of papers and use the funding to to fund their activist efforts. So I think that was like
I had no idea about any of that. The funniest ones I've seen from the 60s, because a lot of them are hilarious, were like the draft card rolling papers or burn the American flag. There were some really funny ones from the 60s. But something I learned from basically Mr. Burton of Robert Burton Associates, which was one of the guys from that made like Easy Wider rolling papers and some of the other things. He explained to me that, Josh, not a person who smokes cannabis is only going to smoke like maybe a joint every few days, but a guy who's smoking cigarettes, he's going to smoke 16 of them a day, come rain or shine. So he was always explaining to me that even though people thought the biggest market was always cannabis, the biggest market by far has always been tobacco, even for some of the funny papers.
Sure.
So yeah, it's just a matter of consumption level. I guess a third of a paper compared to 16. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's dramatic. So a lot of the companies, even if some of the smaller ones like you're talking about went after the cannabis market like that, the biggest market for rolling papers has always been tobacco smokers, because these people are literally smoking like a zillion times more. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So it's
Of course. And, the problem with going after the cannabis market for the rolling paper companies is obviously that then you get classified as paraphernalia, which is illegal in a lot of states and other countries and opens you up to all kinds of possible criminal liability. I know that you faced some of your own legal issues in that regard in 2009 during the Obama administration after the passage of the Smoking Prevention Act. And you actually sued the FDA, right?
Yes. Yeah, I took the FDA to federal court. They really were pissed. They added me to the federal watch list over that. They're just so mean. Rather than fight it, our whole thing was the law does not say the flavored rolling papers are illegal. And we were willing to go to court to fight about it. And their whole thing was Josh is a bad guy. You know what I mean? How dare him? He's a bad guy, bad man, bad man. It was just like, and we went to court like that, where we're sitting here arguing in front of the judge, and they don't have the right to say this stuff is illegal. It's not in the law. And their argument to the judge was, Josh is a bad man, bad man. And the judge got mad at them, really mad at them.
Well, what did the law said that flavored tobacco products were illegal, right?
Yeah, but it was very specific. It was flavored cigarettes and flavored roll your own tobacco were illegal.
Yeah.
It was very specific. The FDA then tried to change it to say that, well, flavored rolling papers could be used to make a flavored cigarette, and therefore they're illegal. The law was not products that might be used to, it was very specific, and they were wrong. And we basically, on the third or fourth day of trial, they basically capitulated the issue. And GCJs are still here today, because their position was simply that all flavored rolling papers are illegal. And midway through the case, they turned to the judge and basically said, not all flavored rolling papers are illegal. So that was the end of the case.
So was it dismissed, or did you win, or how did it turn out?
It turned out where the judge ruled that because they capitulated the issue, there's no longer a case, there's no longer a matter at hand.
So it was dropped. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because we walked in there with them saying that our paper product was illegal, you're going to jail, prison. They would say it in different ways like that. They wouldn't just say you're going to jail. Oh, you're going to jail, prison. You're going to be sentenced. They would just try anything to say words to try to scare you.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, okay, cool. Let's go talk to the judge about that. That's great. You know what I mean? It's not in the law. Yes, we can use the full power of all government authority against you. Like, great, cool, against flavored rolling papers. Yeah, but it all worked out in the end. Like, Juicy J's are still around.
Yeah.
What's important to the FDA is that we don't market them for use with tobacco, which we do not.
It's so funny because that's the opposite of what it always was, which was you have to say tobacco use only, not for weed use. Yeah. And with deals, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah, but see, I'm in a different position because our company, HBI, stands for Herbal Bar Industries. And we started off selling herbal smoking blends. And we probably still are one of, if not the number one seller of smokable herbs, just non-tobacco smokable herbs in America. We used to advertise it in High Times magazine, all of our cool herbal blends, and for years. And we still do them to this day. We used to have brands of herbal cigarettes, but then the regulations made it impossible for them to continue because they got put into a basket with cigarettes where they have to be treated like cigarettes. The regulations made it impossible to continue them. But no, we have this whole herbal background. So for us to say that it's herbal use only is very easy for us because we sell herbs, you know?
Yeah. I just think it's funny that like a lot of the companies, rolling paper and other paraphernalia companies, went through this whole period where they were tobacco use only and trying to distance themselves from weed, and then it turned out that tobacco regulations end up catching up with them anyway. You know, from the other end.
Yeah, tobacco regulations are a real thing. It's a real strange world out there.
Were there any rolling paper companies that you were aware of that were against weed, like adamantly, that didn't want, like, the idea that their papers were being used for cannabis? Or they didn't care?
No, I've seen some of the biggest rolling paper brands in America. They're still out there. Very much argue that their products were only used with tobacco, and they were anti-marijuana. They gave money to anti-marijuana organizations. Now they try to pretend that never happened, but I was there. There's some mean people out there, man. They just look at this as a way to make money. They don't give a fuck about anything but money, and it just makes it so hard. Because they'll do anything in the pursuit of it, you know.
Yeah.
Well, there's no thought of art, the art of paper, the art of rolling, the art of beauty, how to improve the process, how to be the best link in the chain you possibly. There's none of those kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
It's just how do we make more money?
Yeah. Well, I know that some rolling paper companies did embrace cannabis culture. Bambu and Easy Wider, for example, were some of the earliest advertisers in High Times back in the 1970s. And some of the more prominent artists back in the day also embraced rolling paper branding as part of the counterculture. Part of the impact of rolling papers in the culture is obvious, as far as like 1972, Cheech and Chong's famous second album, Big Bambu, the cover of which was designed to look like a giant rolling paper package, and they even had a giant rolling paper, a real one, in the album.
Wait. Okay, I got knowledge for you from that, at least from the ones that we've gotten and the stories that we've been told.
Yeah.
The paper that's inside is not actually a rolling paper.
No,
it was a mock rolling paper. People used it anyway as a rolling paper, but it was actually just a piece of paper. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With Bambu, like a watermark printed on it, not an actual watermark. And people just were so excited, you know, they thought it was a rolling paper and they used it. And it was like, oh no, don't ever use that. It was just meant to be a mock. Yeah. But yeah, at least the stories are worth told.
Wow, that's interesting. Also, obviously, 20 years later, hip-hop icon Dr. Dre did something similar for his debut album, The Chronic. With the Zig-Zag, man. Yeah, the cover features a portrait of him. It looks like, you know, it's inspired, obviously, by the Zig-Zag logo. Well, Dr. Dre's album came out in, what was that, 92, I think. It wasn't too much longer after that you first you started coming up with the concept of Raw. I read online somewhere that you started the company with just $500, and it's now worth an estimated $42 million, which is absolutely incredible, man. I can't even get over that. So I just like to say to you that for the majority of my 20 plus years working at High Times, Raw were always our go-to rolling papers, and have remained my go-tos in the years since. The purity, the smooth, clean burn have really just kind of set the standard to beat in the modern era of the industry. So kudos for that, man. Thank
you. Like, really, the goal is, like, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. I want to make it clear to you, like, because of the history of rolling papers, because of my studying and understanding it, and the way that it is in Alcoy, you're just surrounded by history, and so many of the people that make the rolling paper there are multi generational, all been making rolling paper. You look at it differently. You're not looking at it as a lifeless product. You don't look at it as even if you're that important. What you're trying to do is you realize that you are just a little link in a giant chain, and you're trying to be the best link you possibly can be. So our goal is always to make the absolute best rolling paper that's ever been made in the history of mankind, because that is part of being an Alcoyano. That's part of the mentality, is you're just trying to bring it. And then the person after you does the same thing. And the person after you does the same thing. And you understand that it's a goal. You'll never get there. But if you really tried, if you really gave it your all, if you managed to have some good innovations and really elevate it, then you add it to the craft. And when you're gone, if you're really good at it, then you are like Jose Laporta, where you get a statue in one of the circles of Alcoy. And that is the greatest honor that can be bestowed upon you. And if I'm really lucky, I'll get one of those. I really want one. I know I want one. You don't get it till you're dead. It's all,
yeah.
But they know I really want one.
That's great.
Come on, guys. That's goals. That's fun. You can't go any further than that.
For sure,
you
man.
know.
I mean, I think you're certainly worthy of it. Hopefully, we'll live to see that happen. Well, maybe you won't live to see it happen
Sure.
because.
Let me tell you a little bit of the history of rolling paper so you understand. What we've all learned is it's small things that make huge differences. If you treat it like a lifeless paper, where it just comes out of the mill and you take it, stick it in a booklet, and stick some gum on that's it. You're not even close. It's the tiniest things, the smallest nuances that can make that paper burn a little bit better or not at all. Run like Usain Bolt. It's not just, you don't just have to make the best watermark. You have to impress that watermark in such a way that it's as impressed as it possibly can be. You're doing so many little small changes. You're trying to reduce something called one-sidedness of the paper or two-sidedness of the paper to make it more where it's more similar on both sides. Because I don't know if you know this, when you make paper, there's something called a rough side, which we call the wire side, and there's a smooth side. Oh, that's my plane. And there's a smooth side called the felt side. And you're trying to make it where both sides are similar enough for the consumer. So there's small changes you can do to the paper to make it where both sides will feel similar. And I don't know how many other people do these small little nuanced changes that we do. Yeah. But we're really trying to bring it, man. Yeah. I want my damn statue in Alcoy.
Well, I just want to say, man, what I'm most impressed by is not just your entrepreneurial acumen and financial success, but also the integrity behind what you do and how you've chosen to spend a big portion of those profits. So I know you have the Raw Foundation, which does a lot of good work. Can you have a minute to tell us real quick about Raw Foundation before you go?
Sure. We call it raw giving because that's really what it is. And essentially what we do is people say they give back, but most of the time it doesn't really mean anything. We have a goal, and the goal is to save as many lives as we possibly can before we go. At first, the goal was, my gosh, maybe we can save 100 lives. And then we managed to knock that out of the park using these water well projects. And then we were like, okay, let's save 1,000 lives. And we managed to exceed that. Then it was, okay, 10,000. And we exceeded that. Then it was like, okay, 25,000, which I'm pretty sure we've steamrolled right past. So now the goal is to save 100,000 beautiful human beings before we go. Now, it seems like an enormous amount. How could one company or one person, one group save 100,000 human beings? But it's actually really easy to do. When you have the resources and the right connections, it's all about water. In places we go in Ethiopia, the people simply do not have access to clean water. So they're dying of waterborne illnesses. And it costs so little for us to do a good water project. And we've gotten so good at it now, better and better and better and better, that we can impact more and more people. We can pump water uphill now with solar pumps. We were never able to do that in the beginning. It was just hand pumps. And so now we've been able to give so many people access to clean water. We've done, I believe, at this point, we've done all 7 of the hospitals for Mother Teresa in the Ethiopia region.
Wow.
They're called the Sisters of Mother Teresa Ministries of Charity, but they're basically hospitals of last resort for the poorest of the poor, and they don't have access to clean water. Well, the whole story, which would take me an hour to explain to you, we ended up being basically the people that we gave them their water. It was us. And I say us, that means me, you, all of us together, David Harding on the ground with Water is Life Ethiopia, everyone working together and just caring was all that was really needed. It cost what it cost. We've given these things have cost probably millions of dollars overall. But think about it, man. With a couple $1,000,000 when you're actually saving tens of thousands of human lives, it ain't shit, right?
Yeah.
So the cool thing I've learned about this is the cool thing about having experience in life is a zillion years ago when the feds came at me and they tried to take everything away from me and all that shit, you realize you want to do things that you leave behind that no one can ever really take from you. So when you're doing water well projects in Ethiopia and doing all these kinds of things, you realize that no one can take this from you, man. Ain't no one going to go confiscate Mother Teresa's well.
Yeah,
Feds ain't touching that thing. So I could lose it all and end up living under a bridge, and I still would know that all this stuff actually happened, and it only happened because of all of us, which is fucking beautiful, I think, man.
Yeah.
And so it makes me feel good. It motivates me to keep working, and that's the important thing. It makes our people happy. It makes everybody smile. And hopefully I left a beautiful fucking impact on this incredible planet. And with that, I have to go catch a plane to go to Alcoy and make more paper because I got to make this new one I'm trying to produce, which is very difficult. And I have to be there myself to try to do the final touches on it.
All right. Well, right on, man. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you again.
It's been my pleasure to talk to you, and it's been an honor.
Taking time out of your schedule to educate us about the history of rolling papers. We appreciate it. I wish you safe travels and continued success. Take care, man.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me again. It's been so nice talking to you. I know we haven't talked in a while. I miss you, man. You freaking rock. I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was certainly an enlightening and enjoyable conversation. Who knew rolling papers were so interesting, right? Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Cannthropology. For more information on the World of Cannabis Museum project or to read our Cannthropology blog, please visit our website at worldofcannabis.museum. If you'd like to contact us, you can hit us up on social media or shoot us an email at cannthropology@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed this show, we invite you to go ahead and click the subscribe button, leave us a review, share it with your friends, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. A quick shout out to our great media partners, Cannabis Radio, Hayes Radio, and Leaf Magazine. Thanks again for listening, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and I hope you will join us again next time for another edition of Cannthropology. Until then, this is Bobby Black, and I am history.